Hello, Rebels. Garrett Robinson here, independent author of the Realm Keeper series, the upcoming novel Rebel Yell, which comes out on August 15th, Touch Trilogy, Non-Zombie, Hit Girls, and the Ninjabread Man, and currently the serialized fantasy adventure Nightblade. This is my show VlogaNovel where I live create books for you, everything from the outlining process to writing the first draft, editing, cover design, and formatting all happens live on streaming video on my YouTube channel. You get an exclusive look at the behind the scenes of writing a book, and if you happen to be reading the book as well, all kinds of behind the scenes stuff about uh, what goes into the creation of the characters and where the story is going, and you can actually contribute to the story in many significant ways. So welcome to the show. A couple things for you to know. This is Nightblade episode 2. This is the final VlogaNovel video for Nightblade episode 2. I'm going to finish narrating the audiobook right now. And you can order that book at the link in the blue section of the screen below my face. That link there. And the first book in the series, which is permanently free, by the way, is also linked in the blue section of the screen below my face. In fact, I'm going to modify that really quick because it's free. Okay, good. So you can get the first episode down there. It's free on Amazon, Kobo, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, everywhere. So, like I said, we are narrating the audiobook here. And without further ado, let's just get right back into it, shall we? Do 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 do. Okay. Lauren chuckled and turned back to the quail. She carved off long strips of its flesh and impaled them on sticks from the ground, then propped the sticks up to cook over the fire. That little trick and a fair few stories I learned from an old man named Bracken. Bracken? Said Annis. She cocked her head and narrowed her eyes. Lauren raised her hands. I doubt he gave his true name. He used to say that true names held power, and that only a fool gave theirs out. He was old when my parents were children, and he came to our village in autumn every year. He carried a great sack, filled with metal pans and hunting knives and old boots. He'd trade them in the village, but never for coin. Always he traded for food or trinkets or a nice strong bow. A peddler, said Annis. Lauren cocked her head. I do not know this word. He was a peddler, said Annis, drawing up straight and puffing out her chest in pride. They move from town to town, selling and trading. They often tell stories as well, tall as a peddler's tale, we say on the seat. Lauren shrugged. Well, Bracken told tales, that's true enough. Simple tales of things happening in the 9 kingdoms today, and grand tales of knights and dragons from far-away yesteryears. When I felt... When I went out to fell trees, often he'd follow me and sit in the crook of a tree and spin his stories. I love stories of dragons, said Annis. Is it true they're still to be found out in the world? Lauren gave a little smile. Truly? Dragons? I did not take you for one who sought to be a mighty warrior. Annis smiled. My tutors said the same thing. Soon I turned it into a joke and said that I only liked the dragons so much because they had so much gold, as my family did. Lauren chuckled. I like a quick wit. But come, tell me, said Annis. Did you have favorite stories? Did you like to hear of the princesses who overcame their wicked step-parents? You must have hoped to escape, as they did. Lauren sat silent for a moment. She feared it unwise to speak of her purpose with just anyone. But Annis was only a child. Who would believe her? And if they did, what then? Lauren had done nothing wrong. Yet. She leaned forward and pulled. She leaned forward and pulled the sticks of quail from the fire. Have you... Phlegmy. Drinking too much half and half in my coffee. She leaned forward and pulled the sticks of quail from the fire. Have you heard the tale of Mennet the Mist? Annis took a stick, her eyes alight, and leaned back to wrap her arms around her knees. She took a large bite and chewed noisily. No, who was he? There, there never lived a greater There never lived a greater thief than Mennet the Mist, said Lauren, trying to mimic Brecken's voice when he began a tale. They say he struck a deal with the shadows themselves. He wove them into a cloak to melt into any darkness, and appear in another shadow wherever he wanted, even in the vaults of cruel kings and tyrants. Ooh, said Annis. He was a good man, then? Not always, said Lauren, shaking her head. He grew up poor and barefoot in the streets of some city, I forget which. He fell in with cutthroats and brigands, and when he grew he lived as a highwayman, waylaying caravans, like this one. Annis looked over her shoulder into the night. Bracken would have been proud. But one day, as he and his men rode through the land in search of more plentiful bounty, they came upon a village. The king in that land The king in that land treated his subjects poorly, and met any insolence with fire and sword. Some man in the village had delivered insult, and so the king sent his army to burn the place to the ground. Some of Menet's men wanted to ignore the fire. Others wanted to steal what they could. But Menet spurred his horse into the town, for he had heard a babe's cry. Got weird audio popping happening. I don't know why. But Menet spurred his horse into the town, for he had heard a babe's cry. He found her in a house in the middle of the village, her parents fled or lying cold in the dirt. Menet leapt through a window and scooped her up, but then fire blocked his escape. That is when he pleaded with the shadows he had befriended all his life, and they enveloped him. The house collapsed, and Menet's men thought he had died. But then he stepped from the shadows of the trees, the babe in his arms. Terrified, all the men fled. Menet had finished his days as a highwayman, and he turned his talents to doing good. First he stole all the... Burp. First he stole all the king's gold and brought it to the villagers who had lost their homes, repaying them 10 times for the damage. Then he traveled across the land, seeking other wrongs and turning them right. If a nobleman plotted the death of his lord, he might find his private letters taken and constables soon knocking at his door. If a king plotted a rebellion, Menet would know, and that king would find the other lands united against him. I'll bet he slipped his sharp blades into more than a few backs as well, said Annis. That was terrible. I'll bet he slipped his sharp blades into more than a few backs as well, said Annis. Lauren shook her head quickly. No, Menet never took a life. He preferred cleverness to strength, speed to skill with a blade. No one could bring him to a fight. They found themselves outmaneuvered first, their weapons vanished, their men unwilling to fight. Menet thought that only kings could judge, and then only if justice lay on their side. When they abandoned justice, Menet turned it upon them. But even then he refused to deal it. He never saw it as his place. Annis sat in silence for a moment, chewing on her quail. Then, in a small voice, she said, "Do you mean to find Menet, then?" Lauren stared at the flames. He lived many and more a yesteryear ago. No, the world has not seen Menet's like in an eon. But when Bracken told me those tales, they stayed in my mind. I could not forget them, and whenever my father grew angry and struck, when my mother shrilled and pinched and locked me in a cupboard, I remembered Menet. I remembered that Menet did more good with his mind and his words than any king ever did with a mighty sword and an army at his back. My father seemed weak then, my mother foolish, and I hoped that one day I could escape and become the person they should have been. Annis considered that. "Where is Bracken now?" she said. Swallow. Don't spit. 3 years ago he stopped coming, said Lauren. He must have died. He was very old. God damn it. He must have died. He was very old. The air dropped to silence again. Lauren realized that she had not touched the quail yet, and Annis had eaten nearly half of it. "Are you going to eat all my hard-won bird?" she said. Annis smirked and took another bite. "Only if you refuse to." Lauren picked up a stick, eating without seeing the food in her fingers. She could see only the fire, the red and orange shape of it, leaping up and down, swaying back and forth with every gust of wind. All right, done chapter. That was a long one. That's what she said. Okay. Sound check. Home stretch, guys. 2,500 more words. Excuse me. Chapter 5. Chapter 10. After they ate, Lauren tried to find a place to sleep, but it felt strange to lay in firelight, surrounded by strange men with blades. After a time she rose and took herself beyond the line of wagons. Then her head rested easily upon the ground, and she soon fell asleep. The next morning dawned bright and early, and Lauren woke before most in the camp. She felt no surprise to see Gregor had risen earlier still, and as soon as she stood his gaze snapped to her. She gave him a little wave. He did not so much as blink. The caravan seemed to take an eternity to get moving, and Lauren nearly screamed from impatience. But eventually the drivers mounted their seats and spurred the horses south. Lauren had grown somewhat bored with the countryside, so she spent her time inspecting the caravan instead. The 2 carriages led the way, followed by a dozen wagons of varying sizes. The 2 biggest wagons had 8 wheels each, and were nearly as wide as the road. Lauren let her course run back and forth across the column, peering into the backs of the wagons. She wondered how many of them hid packages wrapped in brown cloth. What could be so valuable that Damaris would hide it from... What could be so valuable that Damaris would hide it from the constables? Something outside the king's law, no doubt, but Lauren had no faintest idea what that could be. Annis tried walking with her, but she soon tired. "I don't know how you do this for hours and hours," she said, cheeks puffing in and out with each breath. "I can scarcely I can scarcely keep pace with the wagons." "The drivers hardly touch their reins," said Lauren. "The horses seem not to need it," said Annis. Soon she abandoned Lauren and retired to her carriage. After some hours had passed, Damaris emerged and mounted a horse that Gregor brought to her. She rode beside the caravan, sometimes spurring to a gallop and ranging ahead at the edge of eyesight, sometimes content to walk beside the wagons and match their pace. Wherever she went, Gregor came close behind on his own steed. Lauren watched with interest. After some time, Damaris turned the horse toward Lauren and rode up. She reined in a few feet away, while Gregor sat just behind her, his eyes never leaving Lauren's face. "You seem quite interested in our horses," said Damaris. Lauren flushed. "Where I come from no one owns a steed. I have seen them only rarely, though I always dreamed of owning one." "Would you like to ride?" said Damaris. For a moment Lauren could not speak. I I am afraid I would only embarrass myself," she said. "I have never sat a saddle in my life." "It is not so hard," said Damaris, "and "It is not so hard," said Damaris, "and you wear the right clothing for it. You need not ride side saddle as I do." She slid from the horse's back and drew its reins into one hand as she approached. "I You do not look—" Lauren's heart raced as the horse neared. It stared at her with wide, gentle eyes, like great pools of black water. "Come," said Damaris. "He is gentle, I promise. Give me your bow." Lauren unslung the bow from her back and handed it over, never taking her eyes from the horse. "Raise your foot." Lauren obeyed without thinking. Damaris seized her boot and placed it in the stirrup. Then she placed Lauren's hand on the saddle horn. "Now step up," said Damaris. "Imagine you are climbing a rock. The horse will remain as steady as that." Lauren took a deep breath and pushed. She swung her leg up and over, and Lauren took a deep breath and pushed. She swung her leg up and over, and before she knew it she had gained the saddle. She sat there for a moment, both hands wrapped around the saddle horn, too terrified to budge. "Your other foot," said Damaris. Lauren looked down. Her right boot hung loose. Flushing, she placed it in the stirrup. "Thank you," she said in a small voice. "Come now, I will walk with you." Damaris tugged on the reins and walked forward. Lauren did not anticipate the sudden motion and nearly pitched backward, but somehow she kept her balance. The saddle bounced uncomfortably against her rear, and she feared that if the horse increased its pace even a little it would send her flying. And yet she rode. She sat a horse for the first time in her life. "You sit too high and try too hard for balance," said Damaris. "Bend your back somewhat to lower your weight, and cling tighter with your thighs. Do not fear to hold the horse's neck. It will not mind unless you tug too hard on the mane." She pushed Lauren's leg to demonstrate, then hunched her own body lower to show her how to sit. Lauren tr- Lauren tried and Lauren tried it and felt the saddle's impacts lessen. Unbidden, a grin spread across her face. "It is so gentle," said Lauren. "I thought it would be harder." "I thought it would be harder." "Well, you are only walking, after all," said Damaris, and a smile had crept into her words. "Travel at this speed grants little benefit other than freedom from your burdens." They walked that way for a while, Gregor close at hand to Lauren's right, Damaris walking to her left. With every passing moment she felt more comfortable with the rolling motion of the horse's back. After a time, however, she felt a soreness creeping up her legs, the muscles growing tense and knotted. Her rear end felt bruised. "I thank you greatly, my lady," said Oren. "I thank you greatly, my lady," said Lauren earnestly. "But perhaps I shall walk again. If I stay here too long, I fear I will lose the use of my legs." Damaris chuckled. "You take to horseback easily, but perhaps you are right. It is not wise to overexert oneself on the first day. But before you dismount, you must try trotting. Gregor?" The man rode up, and Damaris passed him the reins over the horse's neck. He seized them in one hand. Lauren's stomach did a somersault. "Remember, balance yourself with the horse's neck," said Damaris. Then she stepped away and gave the horse's haunch a gentle slap. The horse broke into a trot, but to Lauren it seemed the earth buckled beneath her. She wrapped her legs around the horse's belly and bent over its back, gripping its coat as hard as she could with both hands. Somehow she stayed on, but the saddle horn slammed into her stomach over. Somehow she stayed on, but the saddle horn slammed into her stomach again and again, until soon she cried out with the pain. Gregor gave a tug on the reins, and both horses came to a swift stop. Lauren shook for a moment, unable to move. Finally she pulled her right foot from the stirrup and swung it over. At the last moment her left boot caught in its stirrup, and she fell over backwards to the ground. She felt her face grow beet red. Damaris approached, holding out Lauren's bow. "A fair effort for your first time," she said. "Do not be discouraged. No one learns to ride well in an hour, or even a day." "Th Thank you again, my lady," said Lauren. "You are too kind, but I think I will walk by the wagons now." Damaris smiled and remounted. "Very well. If you are still with us tomorrow, we will try again." She and Gregor rode off before Lauren could explain that she had no intention of leaving. Terrified as she might have been, riding a horse had been a lifelong dream come true. Even as she winced at the soreness in her legs, she envied Damaris as the merchant cantered away. Midday came, and the caravan halted for lunch. They moved so slowly that Lauren would have preferred to eat on the road, but of course they moved so slowly that Lauren would have preferred to eat on the road, but of course such was not her place to suggest. D- Annis disembarked from her carriage and came to eat with Lauren once again. Lauren did not enjoy the thought of hunting with her body so sore. Lauren did not enjoy the thought of hunting with her body so sore, so she gratefully accepted Annis's offer of food. "You looked so funny on the horse," said Annis. "I fared much worse than you on my first day." Damn it. "I fared much worse than you on my first day, but then I was much younger." "I hope to do it again," said Lauren. "I have always wanted a horse of my own." "To roam the land as a wealthy thief," said Annis, a light glowing in her eyes. "Riding from town to town with a bag of gold on your back. It sounds glorious." Lauren looked at her askance. "I recall speaking no such words. Some might call that a foolish wish, and few would see glory in it." "Oh, come now," said Annis, leaning in close and dropping her voice to a murmur. "You cannot fool me. After all that talk of Menet last night, that is your wish, is it not? To become a great righter of wrongs? I could see the light within your eyes when you spoke of it." Lauren swallowed hard and focused on her food. Fool, she thought. She had been too free with her words, and Annis seemed less starry-eyed than Lauren had thought. "I desire no such thing," said Lauren. "I thought Menet used his skills honorably, but only a fool would seek to win her fortune through thievery." "Or speak so openly about it if she did," said Annis with a wink. The girl was not half so silly as she seemed, for all her prudishness. "You spoke foolishly indeed, and you should guard your tongue more closely. But I am not fooled by your naysaying, and I may be able to help with your first conquest." Annis re... Oh, almost done, guys. Almost done. Annis reached into a fold in her cloak and pulled out a small leather purse. She tossed it gently in her hand, and Lauren heard the clink of coin. "What is that?" hissed Lauren. She looked up, frantically scanning for Gregor or one of his guards, but she could not see him, nor did any guard give her a second glance. "A purse," said Annis. "The first in a long, fruitful career for the Nine Kingdoms' next great thief." She thrust it toward Lauren with outstretched hands. Lauren snatched the purse and threw it back. The bag slammed into Annis's chest, making her wince. "Are you a fool?" said Lauren. "I am your mother's guest. What would any honorable person think of me if I stole from her? And as for you, what daughter steals from their own mother? Annis's nostrils flared. And you took nothing from your parents when you ran away from home, did you? Hmm. And you took nothing from your parents when you ran away from home, did you? Lauren balked, unable to think of a reply. I thought as much, said Annis. It's a fine thief who calls another thief dishonorable. This purse is a tiny thing, one from a chest of them. No one would notice it had gone, least of all Mother. How do you think you will make your way upon the road without even a penny in your pocket? Your mother is kind and generous to me, and to you as well, said Lauren. What reason could you have to do this? Because, said Annis, her eyes flashing, I wanted to come with you, but now I think I may not wish to travel beside one so stupid. The words might have stung, but Lauren's mind leapt far away in an instant. She saw herself beneath the boughs of the birchwood, Zane standing before her. I want you to bring me with you, Lauren had said. That is what I feared, said Zane. No, I will not. How could she have been so foolish? Now could she... Now she could see herself in Annis, too young by half, asking a favor she could not understand. But no, there was a difference. My parents had turned my life to something scarcely worth living, said Lauren. Your mother turned... Your mother tends to your every need and has raised you to be no fool besides. We are nothing alike. We are more alike than you know, hissed Annis. If I do not... A shout cut her off. Both their heads snapped toward the sound. Near the front of the caravan, Lauren saw a bustle of sudden activity. What is that? She murmured. An alarm, said Annis. They've spotted someone on the road. They leapt to their feet and ran. It took them only a moment to reach the front of the caravan where It took them only a moment to reach the front of the caravan where Damaris stood. Gregor loomed beside her, blocking her from the road. Mother, what is it? Cried Annis. Struck by a thought, Lauren looked for the purse of coins, but it had vanished. Riders, said Damaris, several of them, and led by a constable. Lauren quailed. Is it... She could not finish. One from yesterday? I cannot tell, said Damaris. But we should not take any chances. Lauren, come with me, quickly. Damaris hurried down the line of caravans. You remember the compartment set in the floor of the wagons, she said. Yes, panted Lauren, breathless from fear. I can hide there. Not the same one, said Damaris. Here. She stopped at the fourth wagon in the line. Lauren vaulted into the back and squinted as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Now that she knew what to look for, she spotted the edges of the panel easily. Her fingers found the crack, and she heaved it upward. This compartment held no brown cloth packages, leaving her plenty of room to lay down. Grateful, she slid into the floor and pulled the panel back over herself. It took forever before she heard the thunder of hoofbeats down the road. They grew louder and louder before pulling to a stop nearby. Who approaches? Said Gregor, his booming voice vibrating the caravan floor. The king's men about his business, said a voice. Lauren did not recognize it as either Corin or Byrne. Yet they still might be here, she reminded herself. The road seems fairly thick with constables, came Damaris's clear voice. 2 visited us only yesterday. The same who sent us, came the new voice. They seek a man and a girl, and they said they saw the girl very near your caravan. They told us the same, said Damaris, but we told them we had seen nothing. I have heard the tale, said the man, but then I questioned them closely, for many merchants upon the road carry goods that give the king great displeasure. To hide them, such merchants might hide panels and holes within their very wagons. I asked my brother constables if they had searched for such concealment, and they said they had not. He sent me They sent me to see if such might be found. Lauren's throat went bone dry. Silence lingered outside the wagon. The man spoke again at last. What say you, my lady? Must my men break your wagons apart plank by plank? Damaris hesitated only a moment before answering. There is no need. The girl hides within that one. Come, and I will take you to her. Continued in Episode 3. Hmm. Just listening to my outro for Episode 1 so I can match what I did. So we're just about done here. I'm going to re-record my intro and and then record my outro for the first time. And then Episode 2 is done, guys. Living Art Books presents Nightblade, Episode 2, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. I'm happy with this. You've been listening to Nightblade, Episode 2, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. For more of Garrett's books, visit garrettbrobinson.com. Ta-da! Okay, guys, we're done. That is everything for Nightblade Episode 2. Thank you very much for watching this episode of VlogaNovel. That's it. I will probably go to bed at this point because it's quite late. Stay tuned tomorrow. I will keep rolling on Episode 3, which is coming out this Friday. Thanks very, very much for watching. Again, you can purchase this book at the link in the blue section of the screen below my face, and the first episode is available for free on all platforms at the other link in the blue section below my face. I hope you enjoyed this experience. Catch the next episode of VlogaNovel on my website, garrettbrobinson.com, and I will see y'all later. Bye.